little box, because it's like an electric switch. You come in a light switch, you just turn it on, you turn it off. It's no matter.
But in this period you're talking about, aren't the great television producers and presenters of that period Oxbridge types producing television for the masses?
I think that there's a certain truth in that, but it's not wholly true. And actually, to be quite honest, although there's a certain truth, I don't think your truth is as important as another truth. A lot of them had been to Oxbridge. I had, from a very working class home. So had Dennis Potter, from an almost exactly similar working class background. So had Alan Bennett, from a little bit up. Alan was a bit low middle class. And I could go through the names, and they're all over the place. So yes, we'd won scholarships. We'd won scholarships to stay in at school, we'd won scholarships to get to Oxford, and so on. And then we'd sort of won scholarships to get into the BBC, in a way. But the idea of us peddling middle-class culture back to the masses is wrong. I think if there was any one motivation, and I don't think there's ever one motivation, if there's any one motivation, it was actually giving to people that we come from what we had. Saying, I know you can't see all this stuff. I know you can't move out of Wickton in the northwest of England or out of Armagh or not very far because of one thing and another. But we can show you this stuff. We can do this. And there it is. And I think that might have been the motivation. So I don't think it was de haut en bas at all. I think it was making it part of the culture of the people we'd come from, whom we knew, because what we knew is that the so-called working class people were on the whole extremely intelligent, but thwarted in their education, extremely curious about the world, but on the whole sort of balked by what was presented to them, and were very willing to argue, debate, and get on with what we might call the civilized things of life, which is to take life seriously. That's civilized.
The South Bank show, which you have been pretty much doing everything with since 1978, writing, producing, editing, presenting. It's a remarkable archive in some ways of artistic and art coverage, shall we say, in Britain. Though it does have its detractors, and it has its detractors precisely because of some of the things we're talking about. The fact that you're prepared to give a programme over to Francis Bacon, but also to give one over to Little Britain, has raised the ire of some people. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of those comments made a few years ago now. I suppose I could summarise them as this. Dumbing down in our culture usually means abandoning things that are important. But the South Bank show is open to criticism for trivialising things that are serious and important.
I just don't know where to begin to disagree with you on that. First of all, the general criticism of the South Bank show and me, that's in the culture. Somebody who pops up in front of a television programme, which every critic thinks they can do better than I can, and many of them probably could. You know? There you are. It just gets on critics' nerves. That's fine. It's in an area, one of the few areas that critics know about is the arts. Not many of them know about physics. Not many of them know about planet Earth, but they know about the arts. So that's fine. That means they're hard. That's absolutely fine. This criticism that we're trivializing what's serious is let me be calm about it, totally wrong. But a couple of nights ago, we did a program about Steve Reich, the American minimalist composer. I would defy any single viewer of yours or any musician to take those 50 minutes apart and said they could have been done at a higher level. We are about to do a program with Damien Hirst. Whatever you think of Damien Hirst, one of the most significant young painters on the planet. And we have done, again, take it apart and see if you go on, just people swipe, but they never analyze. Take it apart. We have researchers constructing those programs, and the wonderful thing about newspapers is that they say, we do this, and their research is usually trivial compared with the amount of stuff that television people put in. But attack by all means, but stop swiping. Come into the ring and let's sort it out.
It's just professional jealousy.
They never do.
Professional jealousy.
And the other thing is that I go back to the previous point. Who are they to tell me what's trivial? How do they know what's trivial? I don't know what's trivial. I'm chancing my arm. I'm saying because of the new technologies There are certain areas of the arts available to the future that weren't before. We are told of great popular singers in the 19th century. We're told about great music hall acts. They're reported. We'll never see them. We have a little scratchy bit on the record if we're lucky. We'll never know. We'll never know. Maybe they were great artists. Certainly James Joyce wrote. I mean, great artists wrote about these popular artists in the T.S. Eliot. They wrote about them in glowing terms. But now we can record them. Now we can pull down 60s popular singers. Now we can pull down early Billy Connolly. Now we can pull down Dennis Potter plays. They're part of the continuing culture. For the first time in world history, popular culture is available to posterity. That's massive. And quite a lot of people don't like that. And they haven't taken it on board. An area that interests me, amuses me, is comedy. I think comedy is hard. I think comedy is really hard. And when people do comedy, we've done people who do comedy from the start of Southern Show. Barry Humphries, Billy, I've mentioned Billy Connolly. And Little Britain just struck me as, well, if I'd been around doing the show when the Goons were on, I'd certainly have done the Goon Show. I mean, there was a bit of genius there. I mean, they still make me laugh, and it's radio from the 1950s. And I can see, as I'm talking to you, those silly voices. And that's why I did a program with Eric Sykes, because I thought there was a sort of genius there. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm back in my own judgment. It's easy in a sense to do Steve Reich. It's easy to do Aida with Pavarotti. It's easy to do Harold Pinter, comparative. It's hard to do them well, but it's easy to do them. But we're chancing our arm in these other areas. One of the reasons I got slated off from the beginning is that I had a manifesto. It was an extremely stupid thing to do. It was really stupid, because all you do is give stuff to your enemies. And I said, I'm going to do popular music. I'm going to do... And the first drama I did was television drama, not the West End, not Shakespeare. I did Dennis Potter. The first music I did, I'd got Von Karajan lined up with the Berlin Philharmonic. The first music I did was Paul McCartney, just to prove a point. I was over-proving a point. And I got slagged off for it, but that's the point I'm making. And I'm making it very vehemently now, because I do believe it, and I kind of think, are people still worried about this? Isn't it obvious? Quality is where it comes, you know, and now it comes in a much wider range, and we know that now because we can re-examine it. The great thing about art is that you can go back and re-examine art. You can go back and look at Rembrandt 100 years later and think, Christ, it gets better, you know.
Well, I clearly pressed a button there. I'm interested in the South Bank show not just because of the content of it, but because of where it comes from, the independent commercial sector. In a way, looking at it and the heritage that it represents, you'd rather expect it to be a BBC programme, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would, and I was BBC trained. I went into the BBC in 1961 as a trainee and worked in radio and then in monitor television program. The only program I would work on was an arts program. So I went there. So all my training was BBC. But when I came to ITV, I found ITV was full of people who had been trained at the BBC or wanted to emulate the BBC. In those days, the BBC was ITV's only competition. And, you know, it's like, you know, in some of those dark genre dramas where the murderer and the victim they're face to face and they reflect, they become the same. And ITV wanted to imitate the BBC in some ways, just as the BBC wanted to imitate ITV. BBC wanted to take ITV's common touch, which is a good thing to have, as Kipling said, and ITV wanted to take BBC's gravitas. And ITV did grab a lot of gravitas.
Well, how do you tell the story of the drift in television from those high values that you have been so eloquently articulating to what we now have?